Hello, everyone, and welcome to Responder Chain. I'm your host, Lucas Dara, and in this series, we're going to be interviewing macOS developers on topics pertaining to their development on the Mac. Each episode is going to be composed of part interview and part coding session. The first half, we're going to talk about how that developer got to where they are today, and in the second part, we're going to be diving into the code, exploring challenges that developer overcame, and perhaps how you can overcome similar problems in your own projects. Without further ado, here's our first episode. Enjoy. Welcome, Paulo, to the very first episode of the Mac interviews. I have to figure out a title for this whole thing, but let's just go ahead and dive in. So
Thank you.
let's start with sort of where you're from and just the general stuff of when you first started using a Mac.
Okay, so I'm from Lisbon, Portugal, and the first time I started using a Mac actually was in college. I was already a Linux user back then, and I think it was my first or second year in college. I was paired up with this colleague for the assignment, and he was using an iBook then.
Okay.
I have never even seen a Mac as biased before. Almost no one had Macs back then. This was 15, 16 years ago, probably. And when I saw him working on that, and it was based on Unix, and I could do everything I was doing already on my machine, I just fell in love with it. I thought this is my computer. And I saved up for some time. I had to get permission from my parents, but my first laptop was actually a PowerBook G4 that I used for the remaining of my college years. And it was awesome. And that's also when I got interested in building Mac apps. Then when I started seeing how simple and beautiful an app could be, and I started following companies like Panic, Bitbetter, Culture Code with Things. I actually was on the first beta of Things, I don't know how many years ago. And I decided back then, this is what I want to do. So I started building my own hobby apps on the side. I think I actually open sourced my first app I ever built for Mac. I think a couple of weeks ago. I found it in my archives, and I thought maybe this still works. It was a game server browser. I used to play Quake 3 a lot back then,
Yeah.
and there was no game server browser on the Mac. And I just built one. That's what I learned. I learned a bunch of stuff with that app. Core Data at the time had just launched. I used that. I learned Cocoa bindings back then, multi-threading, all that. Because when you're doing your CS degree, you're focused more on algorithms, data structures, not a client-side native UI app, right? So had to learn a bunch of stuff that I wasn't taught in the college. So the responder chain, the event loop, all of that stuff, none of that is covered. So it was awesome. I never actually published the app because I got sidetracked to another job at the end of college, but it was certainly one of a great learning experience. I mean, if you want to start learning something, you have to build it. And that's the only way to actually understand the concepts and evolve, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, and then the iPhone came out. That minor experience I had building hobby apps got me my first job as a programmer for an iOS team. This is the year the SDK came out and the iPhone SDK.
Oh,
And I did that for.
Surprised you got a job on the first year that it came out, but
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it helped knowing I met someone in college again who was building a Mac app at a Portuguese telecom company. So when the iPhone came out and the SDK came out, they decided, okay, it's time we build a mobile team for iPhone, Android, and at the time Nokia was also having a few apps built on HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So they just started the team for just to target all of these different options. And he, knowing I was a Coco guy who knew Coco, he just called me up and said, "Hey, this is an opportunity to come work for developing iPhone." And I just said, "Sign me up." And yeah, I stayed there for 6 years just building iOS apps. So I have a lot of experience on iOS as well. And 6 years after 6 years, stuff at the company kind of changed a bit, and I got the opportunity to work for Apple for a few years doing contracting. So I ended up working for Apple for 3 years, and I finally, of this, I have always had some side projects. Secrets was by far the most challenging one and the one I decided to go with. And 2 years ago, I just quit Apple and decided to work on Secrets full time. And I've been doing that ever since.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Well, let's actually talk about Secrets while we're at it. So go ahead and kind of give what your pitch on what Secrets is, I guess.
Okay, Secrets is mainly a password manager for Mac and iOS. I wanted to build a simple yet very secure password manager that was a first-class citizen both on Mac and iOS, that used all the native technologies and behaves like a good, well-behaved Mac app on Mac, and of course the same on iOS. And the Secrets, I actually started building this, I would say 6 or 7 years ago. Just to put this in perspective, I started building my crypto framework to work with this back then, and it still doesn't even use Arc. So it's still just manual memory management because if it works, you don't touch it. So it still works, and it's old, but it works fine. And nice. I mean, my roadmap for Secrets is quite long. I'm probably not even halfway there. I'm still kind of playing catch up with other players in the market, but I think I'm in a good position to evolve and gain a larger user base than what I have right now.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, on that, let's do a little bit on AppKit in general. So I guess let's do something of what was sort of one of the most difficult things you've kind of been challenged with in AppKit, or what was, I guess, doing a lot of iOS stuff. How have you found that AppKit is just kind of frustrating, perhaps, or something you've kind of tried to overcome in AppKit more than UIKit, for example?
Okay, that's a good question with many answers. Okay, but let's start with something that always, I think, tripped me up for a long time when I was just getting started. It was the whole dichotomy between the view and the self. So in the AppKit world, you have an NS image view and you have the corresponding NS image cell. You have NS table view and have a bunch of NS cells you can put in a table view. Button cells. There's always this pair, and it took me quite a while to understand why this was needed and what was the responsibility between the two. And this is something that fortunately Apple just did away entirely for UIKit.
Yep.
There's no mention of cells anywhere, and I'm happy that that's the case. And I know they've been trying to deprecate cells in AppKit, I don't know, for how many years.
Yeah, forever.
I've heard it at least twice in different years at WWDC, yet
I know.
With every new SDK comes out, everything's still the same. There's a few more deprecation warnings, but everything's still the same. It's still a pain to create a custom control nowadays because you still have cells and it's hard.
Yeah, somebody just emailed me recently about how to change focus ring stuff. And I'm like, exactly. Access the cell. So of course there's still no API on NS control or anything like that. So of course
I remember
always falling.
And I remember I kind of already knew what the cell was, why it was there. It was basically for performance reasons back then, and what was its responsibility. But I remember specifically one WWDC, I don't remember what session it was, but the Apple engineer on stage said something like, you can think of cells like stamps, and if you just uses the same stamp to stamp out content inside its bounds. So in that analogy kind of clicked for me back then. Okay, right, cell is just something that knows how to draw whatever, and you only need this. Also answered a bunch of questions I had, which is do I need more than one instance of a cell when I have a view? And you don't. You just reuse the same cell to redraw everything. So that was kind of, that analogy came in the perfect timing for me back then, because it allowed me to fit everything together. And continuing answering your question, I think one of the issues we have today with AppKit is all this legacy stuff we have behind us, and we end up getting into these weird corner cases where the app doesn't behave like you thought it would because of some legacy issue. Cells are one of them, but for example, views on the Mac are not layered back. I mean, they are now, but they weren't layered back by default. Kind of, yeah. There are some cases where they won't actually create a layer for you because that introduces another issues. For I know that scroll views and table views, it's tricky to get all of them layered back and having transparency work as it should. Stuff like I remember, I think it was last year, I created a subclass of NS search field, and if we, I think this is still the case today, but if you implement drawRect on a subclass of NS search field, it will change the behavior of the search field. So right now you have the placeholder is centered. When you click on it, it goes to the left or reading or trailing, whatever. And just by implementing the drawRect and calling super, not doing anything, the AppKit, of course, has a bunch of checks there to keep compatibility with old versions. So if it notices you are implementing drawRect, then it changes its behavior to be how it was prior to, I don't know, 10.6 or 10.5. So there's a bunch of little issues you keep finding, and well, that's legacy, right? And UIKit has the advantages of being very new compared to AppKit.
Yeah. I guess at this point it's pretty old, but it's I mean it's starting to show its age too. With
exactly, and the same issues are starting to crop up. Now we have a bunch of deprecated methods as well, different ways to do the same thing depending on what you're targeting. So I think it's part of software, right?
Yeah, I mean that was kind of, I mean, looking kind of towards Swift UI. I keep hoping that they kind of take a little while to iron out all the little details. I mean, I feel like from the Mac side, there's so many. Every time I look at people asking Swift UI questions, it's just there's so much ambiguity between how to implement different things, and I don't know. I mean, for a new framework like that, I mean, it's young, it's kind of, but I'm just hoping some of these things get ironed out before we kind of go down the same rabbit hole of deprecating a bunch of stuff for.
I feel, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a bit scared about Swift UI on the Mac. I know they have a bunch of users on iOS doing it, and I'm sure they have another bunch of engineers just working on iOS. And I'm scared that Mac doesn't have the same bug that they are going to put in iOS.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely. I mean, that's just how it is. It never does. But I don't know. I just look at how many features there are for Mac applications specifically that, I mean, they're just never going to implement into Swift UI, you know, and I don't see them porting that kind of stuff over with, you know, documents and all the other sort of underlying Cocoa things that, it's going to be a slog either way, but people still want to learn it, but it's I don't know. I think AppKit's going to be around for a while. Whether people are like it or not. So
and the same with UIKit. I'm very interested in Swift UI, but I think we still have time to build UIKit and AppKit apps, and maybe sprinkle a bit of Swift UI here and there where you think it's doable. But yeah, it's a bit early.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with a lot of these apps is, I mean, yeah, you can get by with certain apps anyway with Swift UI, but you know, if you're making something like secrets, for example, that's definitely not something that's going to be done in Swift UI. So
I wouldn't even dream of it right now.
Well, you got plenty of time. So, all right. Well, on that note, we're already a bit into this, so let's just dive into kind of the code portion of this. So, so I'll let you kind of hit it off on what we're going to be doing in the code section of this.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So this is secrets. First, maybe I can just do a bit of a tour of what secrets is.
Yeah.
So secrets is a password manager mainly, but you can store a bunch of other stuff. So you can store credit cards, bank accounts, software licenses, or notes. Everything can fit in a note. If you want to store, say, your health insurance code, you could just do a note for that and put in whatever you want here,
Sure.
right? But mainly you'll be creating plugins. That's about 90% of the use case for secrets is storing plugins and autofilling them in the web browser. Now, with secrets, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted the main window for secrets to be the only place that would handle your data, would handle your passphrase. That meant that I wanted secrets to be useful when you are editing, like I am right now. I could edit this plugin, or I could create a new one. And this is my editing mode, right? Where I have the left pane is my list of items, and the right pane is the detail. The other use case where you'll be most of the time is when you're browsing the web. And how I usually use secrets is I close the detail pane, I put it to the side, and then if I open, say, Safari and go to Apple and try to buy a new MacBook, it will ask me for my login. I just press the toolbar here in secrets and in Safari for the secrets. It opens up secrets already pre-filled with a search string based on the current page you just clicked. And it's asking me, hey, what's the item you want to use to fill on this web page? So I just click fill here, and it automatically fills everything on the login page. This is the 99% use case everyone is gonna be doing, right?
Right.
And the advantage of doing this like so is only the main app, only the native app is actually dealing with your data. It's the only place where you put in your passphrase that handles decryption and encryption. It also means that the browser extensions are quite dumb. They just look at the page, check if there is a login, it can be filled, and tell secrets, hey, there's this page that the user wants to fill. The secrets then handles everything and then sends back the user response. And this makes it very easy to say, for example, support other browsers. Right now I have Firefox here open with the login page for Evernote. And you can see in the menu bar is also aware of the browsers you have open and offers you to fill logins on those.
Cool.
So what I want to talk about here is having this main window behave for these two use cases means that when I have the detail pane open, I want every time I select an item on the list, I want it to show on the detail pane. But if I have the detail pane closed, I still want to be able to drill down to an item from time to time, and probably not having to expand and then collapse the detail pane would be a nice option. So what I ended up doing is just you can double click and it will actually do a slide over animation similar to what you have in iOS with a navigation controller. And the issue here would be, how does this controller know what to do in the different situations, right? Whether the detail pane is open or closed. It should not be its responsibility to know what to do in those cases, because it should only be aware of the list items and whatever is selected. It should defer the decision to somewhere up higher on the view controller chain. Fortunately, when I was building this, iOS had just launched size classes, and they actually solved this problem on their end with UIKit and the UI split view controller. And what I ended up doing was just mimicking what they do on iOS with say iPhone 6s Plus, where you can have a split view controller that behaves differently when the phone is either in portrait or landscape mode, because the size classes are different. So let me just quickly explain what is that solution. So let's take, for example, this view hierarchy, a responder chain hierarchy, because we have controllers here. And you can see this is the case where the window is expanded. On the left side, we have the BIS view and the BIS controller, which are encapsulated in navigation controller, and then that's inside the split view controller, right? This is the expanded case where the split has both the navigation controller and the detail controller showing, okay? When the user selects an item on this case, what happens is the BIS controller will just call a method that will go up the view controller hierarchy, asking if they are able to show a detail controller. And it first goes to navigation controller, then goes to the split view controller. It knows how to show a detail controller, and then this controller will actually call show detail view controller on the split controller. Then it can do its thing and just replace the detail controller with a new one. This is the easy case. This is the case where you have this, right? So whenever I click Booking or Evernote, it will do all this that I just talked.
Yep.
Now, things are different when you have the detail pane collapsed. So, and this is this case. And in this case, split controller only has the navigation controller visible, right? We go about the same thing. So this controller will go up the view controller hierarchy and ask, can you show a detail controller? It will then end up in the split view controller. And by now, split view controller knows it doesn't have the detail open. So what it does is it asks first the BIS controller will call show detail view controller on the split controller, of course, and then it will actually ask the navigation controller, hey, can you show a controller? Because currently I can't do it. And the navigation controller says, yeah, I can show a view controller. And it ends up calling show view controller on the navigation controller, which is a child view controller. And it knows how to present the detail controller, right? And it presents with, exactly. And this does that push animation to present the detail controller.
Cool.
And I think this is, even the names of the methods, I think they are exactly the same as they are on iOS. I think the solution Apple kind of built here takes all the problems you're trying to solve. It defers responsibility of knowing what to do to up the vController chain. So each vController is more cohesive. It can be reused in different scenarios. So this controller could be inside another, whatever, tab bar controller and still use the same methods. It will eventually, someone will handle it up the chain and do whatever it's supposed to do. So now let's look at the code to do this. So right now, this is the method that gets called whenever you pick an item from the list view. So it's show detail view for row. And we do a bunch of stuff here, doesn't really matter, but basically we're trying to get the object we are trying to show on the detail side. Then we create the view controller that knows how to present that object. And finally, we call the method I just mentioned, which is show detail view controller. And these methods are implemented in an NSView controller category. Let's go there. So this is an NSView controller category. I call it presentation. It has both show view controller and show detail view controller. And what they do is pretty simple. First, they call another category method, which is target view controller for action. And then they will call show detail view controller on the returned object. The interesting part here is how we figure out which view controller knows how to respond to this command.
Right.
So this is, oh, I don't want to open it there. I want to open it here. So this is the method. And what we do is, first we check if ourselves can perform that action. Can perform action with sender. And then we recursively call our parent view controller, say, hey, give me the target view controller for this action, right? So it's a recursive method that goes up the view controller chain.
Right.
And here's the pitfall: the can perform action with sender sounds like it should be easy. It actually has a bit of pitfall here, which is it will just call response to selector based on the action we were passed in, and if the view controller says yes, it should say return yes. The problem is, by implementing show view controller and show detail view controller has a category on NS view controller, that means all view controllers we have on our app also respond to this method.
Right.
So we need to be able to differentiate between the category method and if that method was actually overridden. Okay, and I'm sorry if we have Swift people listening right now. This is a bit of Objective-C magic, but what we do is we get the instance method for this selector from the NSV controller class, and then we get a pointer to the implementation, right? And we compare it to the instance method of our class, and we check if the implementation is the same.
Interesting.
This is basically the simplest way to check if a given method is overridden by a subclass, right? So if they are different, then okay, the subclass has actually overridden this method and we should return yes. Otherwise, we say no. These methods are from our category and we should return no for those.
Right.
Okay.
That's smart.
Okay, cool. So show detail view controller. This is how it works. This is how we find which view controller is supposed to handle this, and I can show you also what my subclass of split view does, which is not here. I thought I bookmarked it, but I didn't. And it's this one. So, and it does what you expect it to do. So if the detail plane is collapsed, it will call itself a show view controller, which it knows to check, which is here. It knows how to check here, the master pane view controller sees it. If it responds to show view controller, this will return, in my case, it will return the navigation controller, and it will call show view controller on that. So this is the case where the detail pane is collapsed. If not, then it does a bunch of delegate calls to inform that the detail pane will actually be switched, and finally switches the detail pane with the new view controller that got passed in. So yeah, that's about it. It's, looking back, it's not that complicated, but it's fun to watch how these simple solutions and working with the view controller hierarchy or the responder chain can really make your objects, your views or view controllers be a lot less dependent on wherever they are displayed in. So
right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So just one part I think I missed was, so the split view controller was somehow talking to the nav controller. Where was that communication done again?
So it's here. So when the split view controller first gets the show detail view controller call, it has to check first, is the detail pane collapsed? And it knows this because that's the view controller responsible for it.
I see.
And if it is collapsed, which is the case where we don't show the detail, it calls its own method, show view controller.
Oh, okay.
And it's here. No, don't want to open that.
Gotcha.
Which is here, and it will itself do the same thing. Say, hey, I will show a view controller. Then it tries to find the target view controller to call the show view controller sender, which is currently the navigation controller. So this master pane, this is actually an NS with view controller item.
Oh, okay. I see.
And its view controller is my custom navigation controller that knows how to do the push animation.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
So what this returns here is my navigation controller, and it knows how to respond to show view controller. It just does the push animation. So if we get back a target that knows how to do that, then we call show view controller sender. Okay.
Gotcha.
else it does something I don't even remember what it is. Oh yeah, it inserts a new split view item. But in secrets, we actually never see this happening.
Mm. And does the master pane always contain a navigation controller, or is that
It
not the
does.
case? Okay.
It does. It always controls the navigation control. So let me go back to secrets here. So the switch view controller handles the entire. It's basically the root view controller of the window. Then
Right.
it has the navigation controller, which owns the search bar, the
Yeah.
filters up here, and the list view, which is another view controller, has its master pane. And when you drill down, we are still inside the navigation controller.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we're just now
Uh,
showing. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess my only question was, would it be beneficial to just know that the view controller of master pane was a navigation controller? Like, I just know you're kind of just doing checking the selector on the target to see if it can perform that. Was that intentional, just in case you were to swap out the navigation controller for something else, basically?
Exactly. It was based just to maintain the decoupling of the split
Right.
view controller to its so you can put whatever you want has the master pane, and if you handle show view controller, cool. If not, then
Yeah.
it will default to doing something else.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's cool. Very neat.
Awesome.
Oh, awesome. Well, that's pretty cool. It's always fun to see some Objective-C magic under the hood. And then I always think about how would I do this in Swift, and I don't know, some protocol thing, I guess. But it's
Yeah.
always this. It's always funny when you see this kind of crazy Objective-C dynamic stuff where you're just passing selectors along and seeing if
Yeah.
anybody can do any of it. And I always, like, every time I think about that, I'm like, ugh, it'd be such a pain to protocol this all out. And I still feel like I hit that with Swift, where it's all
I can definitely feel your pain. I'm getting better with Swift nowadays, but I still love Objective-C, and I love the fact that it's just a simple wrapper on top of C, and it's elegant in a way. I know it's verbose. I know it has a bunch of flaws, but
yeah.
it's so easy to understand. You
There's
can do
not a lot
whatever you
of.
want with it. Yeah.
I mean, there's some sort of like arcane ways of calling things, but I feel like the language itself is pretty simple. There's not like a crazy amount of keywords or boilerplate that are different ways of representing things. Like,
Exactly.
there's always kind of like one or two ways that you generally do. You slot it into the Objective-C way of doing things, and I don't know. That's kind of what I like about it. I feel like there's too many options sometimes in Swift, which sounds kind of silly, I guess. But
and we're still building on those, right? So our syntactic sugar, we keep getting more syntactic sugar. Now you don't have to do return statements.
yeah,
And now we have function builders and all of that. So you can look at some code, and if you don't know you're looking at a function builder, you just say, well, how does this even compile? Because it
maps,
just looks weird.
and then we're getting maps with key paths in the next version
Yeah.
of Xcode 2, and I know it just before you know it, it's just you're not really reading any code, and I know it's supposed to be more readable, but I don't know. There's something elegant about Objective-C. I don't care what people say about that language, but it's got its charm. So anyway,
I agree 100%. Having said that, I do enjoy Swift nowadays. I have been working more and more with Swift. There's have to get used to some of its quirks and the whole protocol thing, and when you're supposed to use protocols and whatnot. But the language safety is actually something I have learned to love. I remember the first time I saw optionals, I thought, yuck. Why do I need to do this? I know when the object is nil or not.
nil's always zero. Yeah.
Yeah, nils are fine with me. But nowadays
doesn't crash. It's fine.
Exactly. Nowadays, I can understand the value of having optionals built in the language. Just even if it's not just for a matter of documentation, of you knowing what that variable or that parameter is supposed to be, or if it's going to be nil or not. So that certainly grew on me. And there's a bunch of other stuff I really enjoy in Swift. What I don't enjoy is the fact that whenever I try to use Swift in any of its cooler features, I then have to find a way somehow to call into that from Objective-C, because Secrets is still mostly an Objective-C app. I have already started doing a bunch of stuff in Swift, but there's always this mismatch between structs and a bunch of different enums and all that you can represent and use in Swift, but then you can't access them via Objective-C, and you end up doing this crazy Objective-C method that maps an enum to something else just to be able to call into that code. Yeah, it's a bit weird.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think most of it comes down to just the API was written for Objective-C for all these things, and the tools that we work with are really built for an Objective-C world. They're not really, I mean, as much as we've tried to make them Swifty-er, they're still they're still not written for Swift for the most part. So it's there's definitely that gap in there. So.
Yeah, and the fact that it takes way too long to compile many things using Swift.
Yeah, it is funny to launch Objective-C projects and just, well, it's already
and I
got
got
running.
I got that. So remember that game server browser I was talking at the beginning. Yeah. I remember when I first built it to check if it still builds because I haven't touched it in years. And of course there was some bunch of deprecation there, but sure. Ignore that, and the app builds in less than a minute. I think 30 seconds or not. That
probably still works for the most part too. But
it works. I actually published it and I got it working. I published some screenshots on Twitter. I was super happy. It even works with dark mode as well. So I built it in Carabina and ran it and switched on dark mode and it worked. There was a few UI glitches, but for the most part everything worked fine. So awesome. That's the power of Objective-C. Go and try to do that with the Swift project from, I don't know, 3 years ago.
Yeah. Maybe now that we're on Swift 5 and maybe
now,
Swift 10 will not have that problem, but we'll see. But it won't be the same for Swift UI though. I'm sure there'll be tons of breaking changes that occur.
Yeah, but Swift UI is still very young. Yes, I agree.
So, all right, awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and I'll just give you one last chance to give a shout out for anything. You obviously have secrets, and you want to list websites or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. If you enjoy this type of content, I also have my personal blog at pfandrade.me. I'm sure you can put a link in the description. Yeah. And yeah, if you like this type of stuff, go check out my blog. If you're looking for a password manager, go check out Secrets.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Paulo, and I'll hopefully talk to you again.
Okay, thank you, Lucas.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you later.